Get out of my way. I'm photographing every inch of this damage, and I'm calling my insurance right now. Don't you dare move that car." She was already screaming before she saw my face. Phone up, jaw-locked fury in every step. She had every right to be angry. I had just rear-ended her in the school pickup line like an absolute idiot. Then she pulled down her sunglasses. She stopped mid-sentence, mid-step, mid-breath. The phone dropped to her side, because the man who had just destroyed her bumper, the man standing there with his hands half raised and nowhere to hide, was the same man who had destroyed her heart 11 years ago, 3 weeks before their wedding, and then simply disappeared. If this story is hitting close to home, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button right now and follow along until the very end. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Now let me tell you everything. My name is Daniel Mercer, and I want to start by telling you something I am not proud of. I am a man who is very good at leaving. I have left cities, left opportunities, left friendships that required more than I was willing to give. I have always had a reason, a promotion, a deadline, a project that could not wait. I packaged my departures in the language of ambition and sacrifice, and for a long time people believed me. More importantly, for a long time, I believed myself. But the truth, the real truth, I could not look at directly until I was standing in a school parking lot in the town I had escaped 11 years ago. Is this: I never left because I was brave enough to chase something. I left because I was too afraid to stay. Let me take you back to that afternoon. Because everything, absolutely everything, begins there. It was a Wednesday. One of those gray October afternoons in Cedar Falls, where the air smells like wet leaves, and the sky can't decide whether it wants to rain or simply threaten. I was sitting in the pickup line at Cedar Falls Elementary for the 4th time since I'd come back to help my brother Michael. 4th time. I want you to understand that 4 times in a school pickup line is enough to make any grown adult question their life choices. I was not a patient man in traffic. I was especially not patient in school pickup lines which operate on their own mysterious schedule that seems to have nothing to do with logic or efficiency. Cars lurched forward. Cars stopped. Somebody's minivan took approximately 11 business days to move 3 feet, and then my phone rang. It was a client call I had been chasing for 2 weeks, a project manager in Seattle who had been ghosting my emails and apparently decided 4:15 on a Wednesday was the ideal time to reconnect. I made a decision that I now recognize as spectacularly poor judgment. I looked down, just for a second, just long enough to silence the call so I could deal with it later. The cars moved. I did not move fast enough. There was a sound, not a crash, not really, more like a firm mechanical suggestion that the car in front of me and the car I was driving had introduced themselves against each other's wishes. A bump, a crunch, quiet enough that a stranger might have dismissed it, loud enough that my stomach dropped through the floor of Michael's old SUV. I sat there for exactly 2 seconds, telling myself it wasn't that bad. Then the driver's door of the sedan ahead of me opened and someone got out, and it was immediately clear from the way they moved that it was in fact that bad. She moved fast. I remember that clearly. There was nothing slow or hesitant about the way she came out of that car. It was the movement of someone who has been frustrated before, who knows exactly what to do when they're frustrated, and who has absolutely zero interest in being talked out of being angry. The phone was up before she had fully cleared the door. She was already photographing the damage, already walking toward me, with her jaw set and her shoulders squared, already composing the narrative of how this afternoon had been ruined. I opened my door and stepped out with my hand slightly raised. The universal gesture of a man who knows he has done something wrong and is hoping to survive the consequences. "Hey," I started. "I am so sorry, I was reaching for my phone and—" She didn't stop walking. "License and insurance. Right now. I've got places to be." Her voice was clipped precise. The voice of someone who had learned through experience that directness saves time. She still hadn't looked at me directly. She was looking at the back bumper of her car, crouching slightly to assess the damaged phone still up, documenting everything with the systematic efficiency of someone who had dealt with careless drivers before. "Of course," I said. Let me get my... And then she looked up. I want to tell you there was a graceful way that moment unfolded. There wasn't. She looked up because she wanted to put a face to the inconvenience. That's all. She was going to look at me, decide whether I seemed like the kind of person who would be difficult about insurance, and calibrate her approach accordingly. She looked up, and she went completely still. Not the kind of still where someone pauses to think. The kind of still where every system in a person's body receives a signal it wasn't prepared for and simply stops processing while it figures out what to do next. Her phone hand dropped an inch. Her lips parted slightly. The anger on her face didn't disappear. It just got crowded out by something more complicated. I hadn't seen her face in 11 years. She looked... I need to say this carefully because it matters. She looked like herself. Not like a memory. Not like the version of her I had been carrying around in the back of my mind, which had blurred around the edges, the way memories do when you're determined not to examine them too closely. She looked like Rachel Bennett completely, and actually Rachel, and that was in some ways worse than I had expected. She had her hair a little shorter than I remembered. The same auburn. The same determined eyes that always seemed like they were seeing more than they were letting on. Daniel. The way she said my name. I have thought about this a lot since. She said it like a question, but not a question she was asking me. More like a question she was asking herself. Like she needed to check whether what she was seeing was real. And there was something underneath the question, not warmth, not coldness exactly, but something that landed somewhere between recognition and wound. Rachel. My voice came out quieter than I intended. Hi. She stared at me for another moment. Then she took a breath, one of those breaths that people take when they are deciding in real time how to handle something they did not prepare for. Of course, she said quietly, almost to herself. Of course it's you. And then before either of us could say another word, I heard Noah. Uncle Dan over here, my 8-year-old nephew, came barreling out of the school doors with the absolute zero situational awareness of a child who has spotted the person they were looking for and has no interest in anything that might be happening between the adults. He was running full speed, backpack bouncing, and he hit me at the hip like a small friendly missile. Hey buddy! I grabbed him automatically, steadied him, kept my eyes on Rachel. And then another voice. Mom, is everything okay? A girl had stopped beside Rachel. She had Rachel's eyes, not similar to Rachel's eyes, not reminiscent of them, but actually Rachel's eyes reproduced in a smaller face that was currently looking at the 2 damaged cars with an 8-year-old's very reasonable concern. Rachel put her hand on the girl's shoulder without looking away from me. Everything's fine, Lily, she said, and her voice had changed. It was steady now, the voice of a mother managing a situation. Go wait on the sidewalk for a second, okay? Lily looked from her mother to me to Noah, and the way she looked at Noah told me something without anyone having to say a word. Hi, Noah, Lily said. Hi, Lily, Noah said. The 2 8-year-olds clearly knew each other very well. And in that moment, I understood that whatever happened next, whatever Rachel and I managed to work out between us, life had already decided to make it complicated. We moved the cars to the visitor lot. It took about 4 minutes and felt like 40. We stood beside the modest scrape on her rear bumper. I had been right. It wasn't severe, which was perhaps the only thing going right, and we exchanged insurance information with the clipped efficiency of 2 strangers who happened to possess each other's history. She gave me her insurance card. I gave her mine. She photographed both. I photographed the damage again from a different angle because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. So, she said finally, you're Michael's brother. It wasn't a question. Cedar Falls was not a large town. She knew who Michael was. She probably knew he'd been injured. Small towns remember things about families. Yeah, I said. He hurt his shoulder. I'm here for a few weeks to help. A few weeks, she repeated. Something in how she said it landed differently than the words themselves. A few weeks. As opposed to permanently. As opposed to actually. As opposed to committed to anything beyond the temporary. 8 weeks, I said, as if specificity would help. Maybe a little more if he needs it. She nodded slowly. and then back to Seattle. That's the plan. She held my gaze for a moment with an expression I could not fully decode. Not anger, not sadness, just a kind of assessment, like she was filing the information somewhere useful. "Well," she said, "I hope Michael recovers quickly." And that was it. She called Lily back, got into her car, with the precise contained movements of a woman who has decided that this interaction is over, and drove away. I stood in the parking lot with Noah tugging at my sleeve, asking if we were getting pizza, and I felt like I had just been through something that hadn't officially happened yet. "Uncle Dan, pizza, yes or no?" "Yeah, bud," I said. "Pizza." I want to tell you about the man I was before I came back to Cedar Falls, because I think it matters for understanding what came after. I was successful. I say that without boasting and without particular pride. It is simply accurate. I had built a career in structural engineering that most people would look at and call impressive. International projects, a strong reputation. A Seattle apartment that had all the features apartments are supposed to have, and the particular emptiness that comes from living alone in a place that has been optimized for comfort rather than meaning. I was 41 years old. I worked long hours because I was genuinely good at what I did, and because, if I am honest, working long hours is also very convenient when you don't want to sit with yourself too long. I had relationships after Rachel. 2 that lasted more than a year. Both ended without catastrophe, not because they were unimportant, but because I had become very skilled at the kind of closeness that doesn't require you to change anything fundamental about yourself. I could be present, attentive, even affectionate, up to the precise point where someone needed something from me that cost more than I was willing to pay. Then I would find a reason it wasn't working. The women I dated were not wrong to eventually leave. They had simply encountered the same wall Rachel encountered, and I had become better at hiding how long that wall had been there. I told myself the Rachel story differently over the years. In the early version, it was tragic but necessary. 2 people with incompatible dreams, a sad but honest conclusion. By year 5, it had become almost philosophical, something about how the people who shape us most are often the ones we can't stay with. By year 10, it had faded to a kind of background noise I had learned to stop hearing. I returned to Cedar Falls 6 times in 11 years for holidays, and once for a funeral. I always told Michael I was happy to see him, always meant it, and always scheduled my return flights early enough that there was no risk of the town itself getting a hold of me. Cedar Falls had Rachel in it. That was not a small thing. The arrangement with Michael began with a phone call at 10 p.m. on a Sunday. He was trying to explain that he'd caught his shoulder badly during a rescue call, and I could hear in his voice that he was doing the math on how to manage everything alone. Michael had been alone for 3 years since his wife Karen died. He had gotten so good at managing alone that it sometimes looked like strength when it was actually just practiced silence. "I'll come," I said before he finished explaining. He paused. "Danny, I'm not asking. I know you're not. I'm telling you I'll come. Give me 2 days to clear some things." I want to be clear that my reasons for going back were genuinely about Michael. He needed help, and he would not ask for it, and someone needed to show up. I am not retroactively making myself more noble than I was. I got on that plane because of my brother, but I would be lying if I said there wasn't something else underneath it. Something small and quiet that had been sitting at the back of my mind for years, patient in the way that unfinished things tend to be patient. Cedar Falls kept the version of me I had left behind. I wasn't sure I wanted to look at him, but I was maybe finally a little tired of pretending he didn't exist. The second time I saw Rachel was 3 days after the parking lot, and it happened at a parent information meeting at the school that I had not expected to attend. Noah had thrust a flyer into my hands on Thursday morning with the expression, "Children deploy," when they have already decided the answer is yes. "It says parents should come," he said, pointing at the flyer. "Or people taking care of the parents' kids." That sentence doesn't appear on this flyer, Noah. It's implied. I looked at him. He looked at me. He had his father's stubbornness, which meant he had inherited it from at least 2 directions. "Fine," I said. I arrived at the school multipurpose room at 7 p.m. and found 40 or so parents seated in rows of chairs arranged with aggressive efficiency. I took a seat near the back, which I thought was safe, and which turned out to be directly diagonal to where Rachel was sitting with her colleague, near a table that had obviously been set up for the people running the meeting. She saw me at approximately the same moment I saw her. Her expression shifted not dramatically, just a small recalibration, the kind you make when something surprises you that you haven't decided how to feel about yet. She gave me a brief nod. I nodded back. We both looked at the front of the room. The meeting was about a drainage problem beneath the playground that had apparently been worsening for 2 years. The principal explained it with the specific exhaustion of an administrator who has been explaining the same problem to different audiences and watching nothing happen each time. The district had assessed the repair cost and determined it exceeded the maintenance budget. The playground and community garden would be closed indefinitely while they sought alternative funding. I sat in my folding chair, listening with what I hoped was a neutral expression, and very quietly losing my mind, because the description of the drainage issue was structurally, technically not actually that complicated. I had spent 12 years working on infrastructure projects. I had solved problems significantly more complex than a failing drainage channel beneath an elementary school playground. After the meeting, people gathered in small clusters. I was heading for the exit when Rachel appeared beside me with 2 cups of coffee, holding one out in my direction, like a truce offering or possibly a test. "You were doing the engineer face the whole time," she said. "The what?" "The face where you're listening to a problem and reorganizing it into something solvable in your head. You used to do it at dinner when I'd explain something frustrating about grad school." She paused. "It's very identifiable." I took the coffee. "The drainage issue isn't as complex as they're making it sound." "I know." "You know. I've talked to 2 engineers in the last year. Both said the same thing: repairable, but requires someone willing to design the fix and organize the volunteer labor." She looked at me steadily. "We don't have someone like that." The implication sat between us clear as anything. "Rachel." "I'm not asking you for anything, Daniel," she said, and her voice was even and clear. "I'm just telling you what I know, the same way I would tell anyone who happened to have relevant expertise." She walked away to talk to another parent, and I stood there holding my paper cup of coffee, feeling like I had just been handed something and wasn't sure yet whether it was an opportunity or a warning. Noah told me about Lily on the drive home. Not in the way children tell you something, they've decided to confide more in the way children tell you things because they're thinking out loud and haven't yet developed the adult habit of filtering what they say. "Lily's mom is really nice," he said, looking out the window. "She's the school counselor. She helped me a lot after my mom died." I kept my eyes on the road. "She helped you?" "Yeah. She does this thing where she gives you a feelings card. You pick the one that matches what you feel, and then you talk about why you picked it." He thought about this. "I picked confused a lot. She said that was really normal." "That sounds like a good thing to know," I said carefully. "She always remembers what I tell her," Noah continued. "Like weeks later, she'll ask how I'm doing about the specific thing. Not just like, 'How are you?' but the actual thing." He paused. "Most adults don't do that." I thought about Rachel at the parent meeting, the way she had been watching the room, not the way someone watches a room when they're bored, but the way someone watches a room when they are cataloging it, who looked uncertain, who came in alone, who needed something they hadn't figured out how to ask for. It was the same way she had always been, and I had once called it hesitation. I had once sat across from her in the restaurant where I told her about Singapore, where I told her really that the contracts were already signed, and her role in this decision was to agree, and I had watched that same careful attentiveness on her face and called it lack of enthusiasm for my dream. I had taken the most defining quality of who she was and used it against her because it was inconvenient to me. I owed her an apology that I wasn't sure I had the language for yet. "Uncle Dan T," Noah said. "Yeah, bud." "Are you okay?" "You got quiet." "I'm good," I said. "Just thinking." "About the drainage thing at school." "Something like that." The following Saturday, Noah had a playdate with Lily. I had been informed of this, the way I was informed of many things during those first weeks by Noah at the last possible moment, with the confidence of someone who had already assumed the answer was yes. "I told Lily you'd drop me off at 10. Did Lily's mom agree to this? Lily said she'd ask her. That's not the same as Uncle Dan, 10 o'clock. We arrived at Rachel's house at 10. It was a modest 2-story with a porch that needed attention. I noticed the railing had gone soft in one post, the wood darkening in a way that suggested moisture damage, and a front yard where someone had clearly been trying to establish a garden but hadn't had enough time to give it what it needed. Half-tended. Hopeful. Rachel opened the door before we knocked. She was dressed simply jeans, a sweater that had seen better days, in a way that suggested she'd had it long enough to actually like it, and her hair was pulled back loosely. She looked like someone on a Saturday morning. Not the version she presented to the school hallways. Just a person in their own house who hadn't expected to be standing in front of me quite this soon. Noah, she said warmly, and something in her whole posture shifted toward my nephew in a way that told me everything he had said in the car was completely true. Lily's in the kitchen. She's been ready since 8:30. Noah grinned and disappeared into the house with the ease of a child who had done this many times. Rachel and I stood in the doorway. I can come back at 1, I said, or whenever works. That's fine, she paused. Do you want to come in for a minute? There's coffee. I think we were both slightly surprised that she'd offered. I think she was more surprised than I was. Sure, I said. Thank you. The kitchen was warm and organized in a way that felt lived in rather than curated. Children's drawings on the refrigerator. A stack of professional folders on the counter that someone had clearly pushed aside to make room for the morning. A half-finished cup of coffee that was already hers. From the next room, we could hear Lily explaining to Noah with great seriousness the rules of a game she had invented, and Noah asking clarifying questions in his careful, methodical way. Rachel poured coffee and set a cup in front of me across the kitchen island, and for a moment neither of us said anything, and the sounds of the children filled the silence in a way that was somehow both easier and harder than total quiet. He's a good kid, Rachel said finally. Noah, he was really struggling last year. He's come a long way. Michael says you helped him. I just paid attention. She said it matter-of-factly, not modestly. His teachers paid attention too. It was a team effort. Still, I said, it meant something to him. She held her cup with both hands, looking at the surface of her coffee. He has your brother's face, she said quietly. Same jaw, same way of going very still when he's thinking hard about something. She glanced up. You have that too. The going still. I didn't know what to say to that. Rachel, Daniel. Her voice was quiet, but very clear. I don't need an apology this morning. We're just having coffee. Okay. The kids are happy. The coffee is hot. That's enough for right now. I looked at her for a moment. She was serious. Not cold. She wasn't shutting the conversation down with cruelty. She was simply telling me where she was. This morning, this kitchen, these children. That was the boundary of what she had space for right now, and she was not going to pretend otherwise. Okay, I said again. We drank our coffee. Lily's rules for her invented game drifted in from the next room. At one point, both children dissolved into laughter over something we couldn't hear, and Rachel smiled without meaning to, and for about 3 seconds, the kitchen felt very different than it had when I walked in. Then she set down her cup, straightened the stack of folders on the counter, and returned to being the version of herself that managed things. But I had seen the other version, even for 3 seconds. I filed it carefully the way you file something you are not sure what to do with, but know you are not willing to lose. The porch railing. I came back to pick up Noah at 1, and Lily had talked him into staying for lunch, and Rachel was in the kitchen making sandwiches, and I was standing on the porch waiting, and I put my hand on the railing out of habit. The habit of an engineer, of someone who automatically tests structural integrity without thinking about it, and felt the post move under my palm. Not a lot. Enough. I came inside. Rachel. She looked up from the sandwiches. They're almost ready. Your porch railing, the post on the left, it needs to be replaced before winter, probably before next week. She blinked. I know. I've been meaning to. I can fix it tomorrow morning if you have the materials. If not, I can pick them up. She looked at me for a moment with an expression I couldn't place. Not gratitude exactly. Something more complicated, closer to caution. You don't have to do that, she said. I know. She went back to the sandwiches. I waited. She cut a sandwich in half with slightly more precision than was necessary. The hardware store opens at 8, she said finally. I don't have the materials. I'll be here at 9. She didn't thank me. She handed me a plate with a sandwich on it, as though it were perfectly natural that I would be having lunch in her kitchen, and I sat down at her table and ate it. And from the next room came the sound of 2 8-year-olds who had no idea what their parents had meant to each other and no particular interest in finding out. And something that had been locked for 11 years shifted very slightly in a direction I could not yet name. He showed up at 9 o'clock the next morning with a truck bed full of lumberdeck screws, wood sealant, and 2 cups of coffee from the place on Elm Street that Rachel had mentioned once 11 years ago was the only coffee shop in Cedar Falls worth visiting. He had remembered that without trying to. That was the thing about certain memories, they don't ask permission to stay. Rachel opened the door before he knocked, which he was starting to understand was simply how she operated. She saw the coffee cups in his hand and then looked past him at the truck. You bought enough lumber to rebuild the whole porch, she said. The railing post was soft. I checked the others while I was waiting yesterday. 2 more are showing early moisture damage. Better to do it right now than come back in spring. She looked at him. You inspected my porch posts while you were waiting for Noah. Habit. She was quiet for a second. Then she took the coffee cup he was holding out. Lily's at her father's this weekend. It'll be quiet. He nodded and went to work. He did not expect her to stay outside. She did, though, not hovering, not watching, but sitting on the front steps with her hands around her cup and a folder of papers she was supposedly reviewing. He could tell she wasn't really reading them because she turned pages at irregular intervals that had nothing to do with reading speed. For the first 40 minutes, neither of them spoke about anything real. He asked where she kept her tools. She told him the garage he found them. He asked if she wanted him to seal the other posts while he had the supplies out. She said yes. Practical things. Safe things. Then she said, without looking up from her folder, Noah told Lily you used to live here. Daniel kept his hands on the drill. I grew up here. Moved away for college, came back for a few years after. Then Singapore. Then Seattle. Then Seattle. She turned a page. Lily asked me if you were going to stay. I told her you were helping your brother while he recovered. He set down the drill for a moment. That's accurate. I know it's accurate, Daniel. She finally looked at him. I'm telling you what Lily asked, and I'm telling you what I told her, because I think you should know what the kids are already thinking about. That landed. He picked up the drill again and didn't say anything for a moment because he needed the moment. What did Lily say when you told her that? He asked. She said, but then he'll leave like Daddy did. The drill word. He pressed it into the wood harder than necessary. A clean, precise, completely useless thing to do with the feeling that sentence produced. She's not wrong, Rachel said, not cruelly, just factually. Aaron left. He's a good father. He shows up on weekends, but he left the daily life. She understands departure very concretely. She's 8, not oblivious. I know. Do you? She closed the folder. Because you're here fixing my porch like you live here. And Noah and Lily are best friends who now have a shared adult in their orbit who is going to be gone in 7 weeks. I'm not angry about that. I'm just telling you that children track these things differently than we expect them to. He sat back on his heels and looked at her directly. What do you want me to do? Rachel, tell Noah I can't come to pickups anymore. Stop helping at the school. Back off from everything to make the eventual departure cleaner. I want you to be honest about what this is, she said. That's all. With yourself first. Then with them. I didn't have an answer for that. Not an honest one. So he went back to work, and she went back to pretending to read her folder, and neither of them said anything for another 20 minutes. When he finished and started cleaning up, she came to look at his work. She ran her hand along the new railing post. Solid. She pressed her weight against it. It didn't move. It's good, she said. It'll hold through winter. She nodded. And then quietly, almost to herself, you were always good at the physical things, building, fixing, the things you could see and measure. He knew she wasn't entirely talking about carpentry. He drove home to Michael's house and sat in the driveway for 5 minutes before going inside. Michael was at the kitchen table doing physical therapy exercises with resistance bands and the expression of a man enduring something he resents. He looked up when Daniel came in. "How's the porch?" "Fixed." "How's Rachel?" Daniel set down the leftover wood sealant. "Honest." Michael switched the band to his other arm. "She was always that. It used to bother you." "I know." "Does it bother you now?" Daniel sat down across from him. "No. Now it's the most clarifying thing in my life, which is a different kind of difficult." Michael nodded slowly, the way he nodded when he was actually listening and not just waiting to talk. "You know what Karen used to say about you?" "Nothing good, probably." "She said you were the smartest person she knew who worked the hardest at not understanding himself." He set the resistance band on the table. "She meant it as a compliment to your potential, not a criticism of where you were. She liked you a lot. She just saw the gap." Daniel was quiet. "I saw it too," Michael said. "I just didn't know how to tell you without you leaving sooner." That sentence sat on the kitchen table between them, like something neither of them had planned to put there. "I'm not going to leave sooner," Daniel said. "I'm not asking you to promise that. I'm asking you to stay awake this time, to whatever's happening, even the parts that are uncomfortable to look at directly." He meant Rachel. He meant the project. He meant the particular way Cedar Falls had a way of making Daniel Mercer feel things he preferred to manage from a safe distance. "I'm awake," Daniel said. He wasn't entirely sure that was true, but he was more awake than he'd been in years. He was starting to think those might be the same thing. 3 days later, the school drainage situation became impossible to ignore. He had been driving past the elementary school on his way to the hardware store when he saw the orange construction cones blocking the playground entrance and a laminated notice posted to the chain-link fence. "Playground and community garden closed until further notice." He slowed the truck without deciding to. Got out. Stood at the fence, looking at the way the ground had shifted near the drainage channel, the pattern of subsidence that told a clear story to anyone who knew how to read it. I was still standing there when he heard footsteps behind him. "You have the engineer face again." He turned. Rachel was standing a few feet away in her work coat, a canvas tote bag over one shoulder, clearly heading into the school. She was looking at him with an expression that was not quite amusement and not quite exasperation, somewhere between them. "Sorry," he said. "I was just looking at the drainage problem like it's a puzzle someone left out for you." "It is a puzzle someone left out." She stopped beside him at the fence. For a moment they both looked at the closed-off playground in silence. He could see what she was thinking, not the engineering of it, but the human cost. The kids who couldn't use the garden. The families who had spent 2 years building that space into something meaningful. The exhausted principal trying to explain to parents why there was no money and no timeline. "The district's assessment was conservative," he said. "The actual repair scope is manageable. You'd need a redesigned drainage channel. I could sketch it in a day, and organized volunteer labor. Materials cost is maybe a third of what they quoted." "I know," she said again. "You keep saying that. Because I keep already knowing things you're catching up to." There was no edge in it. Just Rachel being Rachel. "I've been trying to find someone to take this on for 8 months. The 2 engineers I found were willing to advise but not to lead. The repair needs someone who can design it and manage the execution start to finish." He looked at the fence. "I could do that." The silence after that was not comfortable. It was the silence of 2 people who both understand what is being implied and are both fully aware of why it is complicated. "Daniel," she said carefully, "I'm not going to ask you to start something you can't finish. You've told me yourself you're here 8 weeks. 8 weeks might be enough. Might isn't enough for a school. Then I make sure it is." He turned to look at her. "I'm not asking you to trust me on something personal. I'm asking you to let me do a job I'm actually qualified to do." She looked at him for a long moment. The way she looked when she was really thinking, not performing consideration, not buying time, actually thinking. He had forgotten how rare that was. How most people in the middle of a complicated conversation were simultaneously planning their next sentence. Rachel didn't do that. She went quiet, and she actually thought. "Come inside," she said finally. "I'll show you the district's assessment. You can tell me where they went wrong." He followed her inside. This was how Daniel Mercer became unofficially, and without any formal agreement, the project lead for the Cedar Falls Elementary drainage repair. He told himself it was just consulting, just looking at a document, just one afternoon. Michael laughed when he told him that night. Not meanly. Just the laugh of a man who knows his brother well enough to recognize a story that has already moved past the point he's describing it from. "You're going to fix the whole thing," Michael said. "I'm going to look at the options." "Daniel, you drove past and stopped and got out of the truck. That's not a man looking at options. That's a man who has already decided." He wanted to argue. He didn't, because Michael wasn't wrong, and they had both learned at some point that arguing with accurate things is a waste of energy better spent elsewhere. What he didn't say, what he sat with quietly in Michael's kitchen after Noah went to bed with the district assessment spread on the table and his own preliminary sketches taking shape beside it, was that the project had given him something he hadn't realized he was missing. It had given him a reason to stay that wasn't about Rachel, and that felt important. Not because Rachel wasn't important, because he needed for once in his life to be doing the right thing for a reason that had nothing to do with a woman he had once broken and was now trying clumsily to be near again without breaking again. He needed to know he was capable of that. The first volunteer meeting happened on a Thursday evening in the school multi-purpose room. Rachel had organized it, sent emails, made calls, put flyers in the pickup line. 42 parents showed up, which was 23 more than she had expected, and 19 more than Daniel had counted chairs for. He stood at the front of the room with a hand-drawn diagram pinned to a presentation board and watched people settle themselves and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time at the start of a project. He felt like this one mattered. "Thank you all for coming," he started. "I'm Daniel Mercer. I'm a structural engineer. I'm helping out a family member here in Cedar Falls, and I've looked at the school drainage problem. I want to show you what's actually going on down there, what it's going to take to fix it, and why I think we can do this together before the end of the year." A hand went up immediately. A man near the back, heavy-set, skeptical expression, the kind of guy who has been to enough community meetings to know when someone is selling something. "You're not from here," he said. It wasn't quite a question. "I grew up here," Daniel said. "I've been away for a while. I'm back temporarily to help my brother." Temporarily. Same skeptical expression. "Long enough to finish the job." He met the man's eyes directly. "That's a commitment, not a qualification." A beat. Then the man nodded barely and leaned back. From the side of the room, Rachel was watching him. Not with warmth exactly. With the careful attention of someone who was reserving judgment while acknowledging the evidence. He turned back to his diagram. The meeting ran an hour and 15 minutes. By the end, he had 19 volunteers signed up for labor, 3 local businesses who had indicated willingness to donate materials, and Michael, who had shown up in the back row with his arm in a sling and a look that said, "Try to stop me," offering to coordinate the volunteer scheduling. Walking out to the parking lot afterward, Daniel fell into step beside Rachel without planning to. "That went better than I expected," she said. The guy in the back was going to be the hardest one. Once he moved, the rest followed. "Bill Hargrove," she said. "He's been to every school meeting for 6 years. He's not obstructionist. He just needs to know someone's actually going to show up and do what they say." Good to know. He lost faith after the last 3 contractors the district hired disappeared. She glanced at Daniel sideways. He has a type. The words were careful, measured, not accusatory, just honest, the way she was always honest in that particular Rachel way, where she said the thing plainly and let it mean what it meant without embellishment. He stopped walking. "Rachel." She stopped too. "I hear you," he said. "I hear everything you're not quite saying, and I don't have a rebuttal. I don't have a record of showing up that I can point to. All I have is now." She looked at him for a moment. The parking lot had mostly emptied. A few parents were still talking near their cars in the distance. "I know," she said quietly. "I know that's all any of us ever have." She paused. "That doesn't make it easier to count on." She walked to her car. He watched her go and didn't try to fill the space with anything. The project work started the following Monday. He was at the school by 7:30 before the first bell, digging into the site with the same systematic focus he brought to projects that paid 5 times as much. It felt strange that focus applied here. Not diminished, clarified. Noah started asking questions about it at dinner. "How does water know where to go?" he asked one night, pushing his food around his plate with the philosophical preoccupation of an 8-year-old who had decided engineering was now interesting. "It follows the lowest path," Daniel said. "Gravity pulls it down and it takes whatever route down is easiest. So if the path is broken, it goes somewhere wrong." Exactly. The old drainage channel broke down, so the water started going somewhere it wasn't supposed to. Now the ground underneath the playground is soft and damaged. Noah thought about this. "So you're making it a new right path?" "That's exactly what I'm doing." Noah seemed satisfied with this, in the way children are satisfied when an explanation actually makes sense to them instead of being simplified past accuracy. He ate his dinner in thoughtful silence. "Lily says her mom goes in early on the days you're there," he said casually. Daniel kept his expression neutral. "I didn't know that." "Lily says she has paperwork, but Lily says she always has paperwork, so it's not really a reason, it's an excuse." He took a bite. "I'm just reporting what Lily said." "I understand. I'm not saying anything, just reporting." "I got it, Noah." His nephew gave him a look of perfect 8-year-old innocence that fooled neither of them. The first twist nobody saw coming happened on a Wednesday 2.5 weeks into the project. Daniel was reviewing soil samples in the school's conference room when Rachel appeared in the doorway with an expression he hadn't seen on her before. Not closed, not careful, something closer to rattled. He looked up. "What happened?" She came in and closed the door behind her. She set a folder on the table he could see from the letterhead it was from the school district's administrative office. "The district received a call yesterday," she said, "from a contractor. He submitted a competing proposal to handle the drainage repair. Lower cost than the district's original estimate, faster timeline." She paused. "If the board accepts it at next week's meeting, our volunteer project gets dissolved. The contractor takes over." Daniel opened the folder. He read the first page. Then he read it again. "This timeline is fabricated," he said. "This work cannot be completed in the time frame he's claiming, not without cutting structural corners." "I know. This is the same approach the district took with the original design that caused the problem." "I know, Daniel." He looked at her. "Who submitted this?" She hesitated. "A company out of Madison. But the local contact listed is someone the board already has a relationship with. He's been trying to get school contracts for 2 years. And the board is considering it. The board is always considering whatever costs less and requires less organization," she said. "That's not cynicism. That's 11 years of watching how these decisions get made." He closed the folder. Something had shifted in him. Not anger exactly, but the specific energizing clarity of someone who suddenly understands that what they're building is under threat and has a choice about whether to fight for it. "When's the board meeting?" "Next Tuesday, 7 p.m. "Then we need to be there." He looked at her. "We need data documentation and a community presence. Can you get parents to show up?" "I can get parents to show up," she said without hesitation. "Can you put together a presentation that makes it clear why the competing proposal is structurally unsound?" "Give me 2 days." She picked up the folder. She was already moving toward the door. Then she stopped. "Daniel." She said his name the way she had in the parking lot the first day, like it contained more than the 2 syllables. "This is good work you're doing. I want you to know I see that. Whatever else is complicated between us, I see the work." He didn't know what to do with that, except hold it very carefully. "Thank you," he said. She nodded once and left. He sat in the conference room alone for a moment. On the table in front of him were his site drawings, his soil data, his drainage calculations. The evidence of 6 weeks of commitment to a community that had been his once, and that he had left, and that had apparently been patiently waiting for him to come back and do something worth staying for. He picked up his pencil. He got back to work. That night when he got home, Michael was sitting at the kitchen table with Noah, helping him glue together a model bridge for a school project. Their heads were bent close together over the structure, Michael directing with his good arm. Noah's tongue pressed to the corner of his mouth in concentration. Daniel stood in the doorway for a moment and watched them without either of them knowing he was there. He thought about what Rachel had said. About Lily. About children tracking departures concretely. About how an 8-year-old girl had said he would leave like her daddy did, and how Rachel had told him that not as an accusation, but as information, because she was the kind of person who believed in giving people accurate information about the things that mattered. He thought about his Seattle apartment, and the promotion email, and the contract he had not yet opened again since the night he'd started drafting his acceptance. He thought about Noah saying, "So you're making it a new right path." He went into the kitchen. Michael looked up. "There's food," Michael said. "I actually cooked. Real food, not cereal." "You cooked." With one arm it took 45 minutes to do what should have taken 15, but yes, I cooked. Noah looked up from the bridge. "Uncle Dan, look, we're reinforcing the joints." Daniel sat down and leaned over the model. The joints were reinforced, careful, methodical, a child's version of good structural practice. He felt something catch in his chest that he didn't try to name. "Strong work, buddy," he said. "Ms. Bennett taught us," Noah said. "She said strong things need more than one support, so we're making sure every joint has a backup." He looked at the small paper bridge on the table between them. He thought about Rachel saying that in a classroom to his nephew. He thought about it being written on a flyer that Noah had now folded into his backpack, probably. He thought about the 8 weeks he had agreed to, and the Tuesday board meeting, and the contractor from Madison, and the drainage channel that was 4 weeks from being fixed, and the porch that was already solid for winter. I thought about what it would mean to leave before all of it was finished. And he thought about the moment in the parking lot when Rachel had gone completely still, and the look on her face that had been neither anger nor warmth, but something more essential than both, and how he had spent 11 years making decisions that prioritized his own forward momentum over the people he was leaving behind. He sat at that kitchen table with his brother and his nephew, and a half-built model bridge, and something shifted in his chest that he suspected was not going to shift back. He didn't say anything about it. He ate the food Michael had cooked with one arm, helped Noah press the final joint into place, and waited until both of them had gone to bed before he opened his laptop. He didn't open the Seattle email. He opened his engineering software and started building the presentation for the Tuesday board meeting. It was 11:45 p.m. He was not tired. He was the most awake he had been in 11 years, and he wasn't entirely sure what to do with that, except keep working. He finished the presentation at 2:17 in the morning, not because it took that long to build the technical case. The technical case was straightforward, and Daniel had made harder arguments with worse data on bigger stages. It took that long because he kept stopping, kept pulling up the contractor's competing proposal and reading it again, kept finding new places where the numbers had been softened, where the timeline had been compressed past engineering reality, where corners had been rounded off on paper, in ways that would eventually be rounded off in concrete and steel and drainage pipe underground where nobody would see it until the ground started shifting again. I knew this kind of work. He had seen it done on 3 continents. The math that looks right until you know what questions to ask. The confident timeline that depends on nothing going wrong, which things always do. What made him sit back and stare at the ceiling at 11:15 was something that had nothing to do with soil compaction rates. He had pulled up his Seattle email while waiting for a calculation to process. Not to answer it, just to look at it. The subject line, Regional Director Position, Final Offer. Please respond by Friday. He had been reading that subject line for 4 days without opening the email. The way you can look at a closed door for a long time without reaching for the handle. He opened it at 11:22. The offer was exactly what he remembered from the first notification. Salary he had spent 6 years working toward. A bridge project in Vancouver that would be the most significant structural work of his career. A team of 42 people waiting for someone to lead them. The firm had been patient with his Cedar Falls delay, but patient had a deadline, and the deadline was Friday at 5 p.m. He read the whole email. Then he closed the laptop, Then he opened it again and read it one more time. The way you reread something you're hoping will say something different the second time. It didn't say anything different. It said what it said. It was a good offer. It was an exceptional offer. 6 years ago, he would have called it the defining moment of his career. He closed the laptop for the second time and went back to his drainage presentation, and he did not think about the email, which meant he thought about almost nothing else until 2:17, when he finally finished, and the decision that was not yet a decision settled around him in Michael's quiet kitchen, like weather moving in. The Tuesday board meeting was at 7 p.m. By 6:30, the multi-purpose room was so full that the fire marshal would have had opinions. Rachel had done what she said she would do. Daniel had done what he said he would do. Together, without formally coordinating it, they had built something that looked from the front of the room like exactly what it was, a community that had decided it was done, being patient with decisions made above it. Daniel stood at the front with his laptop connected to the projector and watched the room fill, and thought about what Michael had said in the kitchen 2 weeks ago. You keep saying you don't want to hurt anyone, but what you really don't want is to watch them react while you choose yourself. He thought about that a lot. He was still thinking about it. The board filed in at 7 on the dot. 5 people in their 50s and 60s who had the particular expression of local officials who have grown accustomed to being the least enthusiastic people in any given room. The board chair, a woman named Patricia Holden, set her water glass down with the authority of someone who had chaired enough meetings to know exactly how long they ran when someone showed up with a projector. She looked at Daniel. She looked at the room. She looked at Daniel again. "Mr. Mercer," she said, "I understand you have a presentation for us." "I do," he said. "It'll take about 15 minutes. Then I'll take questions." From the third row, Bill Hargrove, the skeptic from the first volunteer meeting, was watching with his arms crossed. Not hostile. Waiting. The same posture he'd had 4 weeks ago before he'd signed up to volunteer 12 hours of his weekend. The difference was that now his name was on the volunteer list, and that changed the nature of his waiting. Daniel clicked to his first slide and started talking. He did not talk like a man trying to convince anyone of anything. He talked like a man who had looked at the data until the data told him a clear story, and who was now sharing that story with the people it belonged to. He walked them through the competing contractor's proposal point by point. He showed them where the timeline compressed past engineering possibility. He showed them 3 previous projects the contractor had completed under similar constraints, and what the 5-year maintenance costs had looked like on each one. He showed them the volunteer project's current progress, 40% of the drainage channel, already redesigned materials, cost running significantly under projected budget labor calendar, fully scheduled through completion. Then he said something he had not planned to say. "I want to be honest with this board about something," he said. "I came to Cedar Falls 6 weeks ago to help my brother. I had no intention of getting involved in a community project. I had a return date and a career milestone waiting for me in Seattle, and neither of those things has changed." The room went very quiet. He could feel Rachel in his peripheral vision without looking at her directly. "What has changed," he continued, "is what I understand about what's being built here, and I am not talking about a drainage channel." He looked out at the room, at the parents he had worked beside on Saturdays, at Michael in the back row with his sling, at the 2 rows of chairs where the volunteer crew had seated themselves together without being organized to do so. "You built something. This community built something before I got here, and the project gave it a structure. What the competing proposal is offering you is faster and cheaper on paper. What it will actually deliver is a solved drainage problem and a dissolved community. Those are 2 different outcomes. Only one of them is visible in a budget spreadsheet." He clicked to his final slide. Cost comparison. Timeline. Risk assessment. Every number sourced and defensible. "I recommend you decline the competing proposal and allow the community project to complete the work it has already begun," he said. "Not because I'm invested in it personally, because the data supports it." He sat down. Patricia Holden looked at her board colleagues. Then she looked back at Daniel. "You said your return date hasn't changed." "It hasn't. So you're asking us to trust a project whose lead engineer leaves before it's finished? The room was very quiet, not the impatient quiet of people waiting for the meeting to end. The attentive quiet of people who understand that something real is being asked. He looked at her directly. I'm asking you to trust the 47 volunteers who will be here long after I'm gone, and the design I will have completed and documented in enough detail that any competent engineer can oversee the final work. I'm asking you to trust the community you represent over a contractor from Madison who will finish the job and move to the next one. He paused. The project lead matters less than the project. Another pause. Then Bill Hargrove from the third row said, without raising his hand, I move, we decline the competing proposal. Someone seconded it before Patricia Holden could respond. The vote was 4-1 in favor of declining, walking out of the school afterward. Daniel felt the specific clarifying satisfaction of a technical problem correctly solved. He also felt something underneath it that was less clean and more complicated, and he was honest enough with himself to know what it was. He had just told a room full of people that the project lead mattered less than the project. He had said it as a technical truth, and it was a technical truth. It was also, he recognized, standing in the cold parking lot with his laptop bag over his shoulder. A sentence he was not entirely sure he believed in the way it applied to himself. Rachel appeared beside him. That was well done, she said. The data made the case. No. She said it firmly, but without heat. You made the case. The data was the tool. She looked at him. Don't minimize what you did in there. He wanted to say something deflecting, something about the volunteer team, or Michael's coordination, or the parents who had shown up. He stopped himself. Thank you, he said instead. She nodded. They walked together toward the parking lot without it being a decision, exactly more a natural direction, the way water finds the lowest path. The night was cold and clear, and their breath showed in small visible clouds. Patricia Holden wasn't wrong, Rachel said. He glanced at her. About the lead engineer leaving, she said. That's a real vulnerability in the project. You know that. I know. I'm documenting everything. The design is complete enough that I'm not talking about the engineering, Daniel. He stopped walking. She stopped too. I know you're not, he said quietly. They were standing in the parking lot, and it was a Tuesday night, and there were maybe 12 other people within 200 feet of them, and none of that was what either of them was thinking about. Lily asked me this morning if you were coming to her concert, Rachel said. It's in 3 weeks. I know. Noah told me about it. Are you coming? He looked at her. The question was simple. The answer was complicated in ways that neither of them needed him to explain. I want to, he said. That's not an answer. I know. She looked at him for a long moment. Not angry, not hurt exactly. Something that might have been the face she made when she was deciding how much of something to say. The girls in my divorce support group, she said. A lot of them talk about the men who wanted to. Men who wanted to stay, who wanted to show up, who wanted to do the right thing. Wanting is not the same as doing. Most of them knew that in their marriages. Most of them held on through a lot of, I want to, before they stopped holding on. She paused. I am not equating you to their situations. I'm just telling you what I've learned from listening. He absorbed that. He didn't argue with it. I have until Friday, he said, to give Seattle an answer. She didn't react to that in a visible way. She simply filed it the way she filed things, precisely without drama. Then you have until Friday, she said. Good night, Daniel. She walked to her car. He stood in the parking lot and watched her go, and did not say anything, because there was nothing yet to say that was true enough to deserve being said. He drove home. Michael was awake, which was unusual. How'd the meeting go? Michael asked. We won. Good. Michael looked at him. And I have until Friday to answer Seattle. Michael was quiet for a moment. Did you tell Rachel? Yeah. What did she say? Daniel sat down at the kitchen table. She said I have until Friday. He exhaled slowly. She doesn't do the thing where she tells me what she wants me to decide. She never did that, even before. She just gives you the information and lets you decide. Is that a good thing? It's a terrifying thing, because you can't use her as an excuse either direction. You have to actually know what you want. Michael sat across from him. Neither of them spoke for a moment. What do you want? Michael asked. He didn't answer right away. He sat with the question the way he had been avoiding sitting with it for 4 days. I don't know yet, he said honestly. I know what I should want. I know what the version of me from 2 years ago would have wanted. I know what the version of me from 11 years ago wanted, and I know exactly how that turned out. He looked at his hands on the table. I'm trying to figure out what this version of me wants, the current one. I'm not sure I know him that well yet. Michael looked at him with a quiet steadiness that was one of the things Daniel had always trusted most about his brother. Then you've got until Friday to introduce yourself, Michael said. On Wednesday morning, Daniel was at the school site by 7:30. The volunteer crew arrived at 8. They worked through the morning with the particular rhythm that a crew develops when they've been at something long enough to stop explaining things to each other. Bill Hargrove had become, without anyone appointing him to the role, the de facto crew chief on the ground, organizing, redirecting, keeping the pace. He had the gift of making people feel useful rather than managed. At 10:15, Hargrove came to stand beside Daniel at the drainage channel. My son's in 2nd grade, Hargrove said without preamble. He's been asking when the garden's coming back every week since they closed it. He grew tomatoes there last spring. First thing he ever grew. Daniel didn't say anything because he understood that Hargrove wasn't looking for a response. I was wrong about you, Hargrove said. At the first meeting, I thought you were a drive-by, the kind who shows up and makes plans and then isn't there when it's time to dig. You weren't entirely wrong, Daniel said. You had reasonable evidence. Hargrove looked at him sideways. You're still here. Still here. Hargrove nodded slowly. My wife thinks you're going to stay. She told me last night. She said she can tell when a man is making up his mind about something. He picked up a shovel. She's usually right about that kind of thing. Daniel watched him walk back to the trench. He stood there for a moment with the cold morning air around him and the sound of shovels and the smell of turned earth and the particular sensation of standing in the middle of a decision that has already been made, somewhere deeper than the part of you that thinks in words. He pulled out his phone. He opened the Seattle email. He read it one more time. He did not answer it. He put his phone back in his pocket and picked up his own shovel and went back to work. The storm hit on Thursday night. I was in Michael's kitchen at 9:45, working on final documentation for the drainage design when the rain started. Not the tentative October rain that Cedar Falls had been producing all month. Something harder and more serious, the kind that comes in from the west with intention. He tracked it on his weather app and registered that the drainage channel barriers they had installed were temporary and had not been designed for significant water volume, because they had not expected significant water volume for another 3 weeks when the permanent structures would be in place. His phone rang at 10:20. It was Rachel. The barriers at the school, she said. The background behind her voice was already wet. She was either outside or had a window open. Are they going to hold in this? He had already pulled up the rainfall data. Not if this keeps up. The channel's only 40% complete. If we get another inch in the next 2 hours, the water will redirect toward the lower classrooms. Yes. A very short silence. How bad? She asked. Counseling office, storage room with the donated supplies, and about 3 years of student records. Significant damage. He heard her breathe out. How long before it gets there? He looked at the rainfall rate. 90 minutes if the rain holds at this intensity, less if it picks up. Can we do anything? I was already standing up, already reaching for his jacket with his phone pressed to his shoulder. Yes. I need sandbags and every available set of hands you can reach. Can you call the volunteer list? I'm already on it, she said. Meet me at the school. She hung up. I went to the garage first, where Michael kept emergency supplies left over from his paramedic years. Sandbags, not many, but some. He loaded them into the truck. He texted the volunteer group chat a single sentence. Emergency at school, water threatening classrooms. Need hands now, bring shovels. He was at the school in 11 minutes. Rachel was already there. She had beaten him, which meant she had left her house within minutes of hanging up the phone, which meant she had already known the answer before she called him. She was standing in the rain outside the maintenance door, in her dark green coat with a flashlight in one hand and her phone in the other, calling the next name on the list. He got out of the truck. "How many?" he asked. 6 confirmed, 4 more probable. Michael called, "He's coming. He shouldn't be moving sandbags with that shoulder." "I know, I told him that. He hung up on me." He almost smiled. He stopped himself. They moved fast. He directed them where to place the sandbags, not randomly, but following the logic of the drainage path, building a secondary barrier that would redirect the water away from the classrooms. It was physical work, wet and cold in the dark, with flashlights and phone screens. And it was also engineering, real-time applied engineering in the mud at 10:30 on a Thursday night, and he moved through it with a clarity he didn't stop to examine. Volunteers arrived in clusters. Bill Hargrove showed up with his truck and 12 additional sandbags and his teenage son. Michael arrived with his arm in its sling and immediately began organizing the relay line for passing bags, doing it one-handed with a capability that made Daniel both proud and concerned. Rachel worked alongside everyone. She did not stand back and coordinate. She moved sandbags. She directed people to positions. She ran back to the maintenance shed for additional supplies. She worked with her hair wet and her coat muddy, and the kind of complete presence that had nothing to do with image and everything to do with the fact that this was her school and these were her kids' records, and she was not the person who stood to the side. At 11:15, the rain intensified. At 11:17, Daniel looked at the water level in the temporary channel and felt his stomach drop. "We need more on the east side," he said to Hargrove. "Now. The barrier's holding, but the volume's higher than I calculated." Hargrove turned and bellowed across the crew without hesitation. 4 people shifted positions. It was not graceful. It was muddy and chaotic, and it smelled like wet earth, and someone's truck radio had inexplicably started playing something country from 3 vehicles over and in the middle of all of it. Daniel found Rachel at his left shoulder, moving a sandbag into position that he had been about to move himself. "East corner," she asked. "East corner," he confirmed. They worked side by side for 40 minutes in the rain, and neither of them said anything except what was necessary, and it was the most honest communication he'd had with another person in years. At 12:10 a.m., the rain began to ease. At 12:40, they confirmed the barriers had held. The classrooms were dry. The records were dry. The counseling office was dry. The crew stood in this muddy schoolyard, breathing hard, wet through. Someone had produced a thermos of a coffee from somewhere and was passing it around. Bill Hargrove's teenage son was looking at the held barriers with the expression of a teenager who has just discovered that physical work in a crisis is against all expectations satisfying. Michael found Daniel. "Not bad for a guy who was only here 8 weeks, he said. Daniel looked at him. "Don't. I'm just saying." "I know what you're saying." Michael passed him the thermos. "The crew's talking about a completion celebration. When the project's done, they want you there." "I'll be there," Daniel said. And he meant something by that. Something he hadn't fully decided yet, but that was becoming clearer with every hour, the way a structure becomes clearer as you build it one supported joint at a time. He turned and found Rachel standing a few feet away, talking to one of the other parents. Her coat was muddy. She had wet hair plastered to the side of her face, and she was laughing genuinely. Laughing at something the other parent had said, the way people laugh after shared crisis, when the adrenaline becomes something lighter. Then she looked over and caught him watching her. I didn't look away. Neither did she. For a moment, standing in the schoolyard at 12:40 a.m. with muddy boots and an empty thermos, and 47 people who had just held something together by showing up in the dark and the rain, they looked at each other directly. Not as former fiancés. Not as an insurance exchange in a parking lot. As 2 people who had just done something real together and both knew it. Rachel looked at him for a long moment. Something crossed her face that he couldn't name. Not warmth exactly, not softness exactly, but something that was adjacent to both and more permanent than either. Then she turned back to her conversation. He stood in the muddy yard and understood that the email from Seattle was still in his inbox, unanswered, with a deadline of Friday at 5 p.m. He also understood that whatever he decided, he could not do it the way he had made decisions before. Not in secret. Not in the middle of the night with the contracts already signed before anyone who mattered had been told. He had one honest conversation he needed to have before Friday. He had been putting it off because he was afraid of it. And that fear was so familiar, so precisely the same fear that had made him sign the Singapore contracts in secret 11 years ago, that recognizing it in himself was like looking at a photograph of a version of himself he had promised to leave behind. He was done letting that version drive. He texted Michael from the parking lot. Need to talk tomorrow, both of us. Morning. Michael's reply came back in under a minute. I'll make coffee. He drove home through the wet streets of Cedar Falls with the rain fading to a mist, and his heart doing something complicated in his chest that he recognized underneath the noise of it as the sensation of a man approaching a decision he is finally ready to make, honestly. I didn't know yet what the decision was. He knew it needed to be honest. He knew it needed to include the people it affected. And he knew with a certainty that was rooted somewhere deeper than strategy, that those two things had always been the only requirements worth keeping. Michael had the coffee ready at 7:15, not the automatic drip kind he usually made on weekday mornings when he was running late for Noah's school drop-off. The real kind, pressed in the French press, Karen had bought their first year of marriage, and that Michael still used every morning without comment, which Daniel had always understood was its own form of faithfulness. 2 mugs on the table. Noah was still asleep. The house had that particular Friday morning quiet that belongs only to the hour before children wake up and reclaim the space. Daniel sat down. Michael sat across from him. Neither of them reached for their coffee immediately. The email's still open, Daniel said. Seattle, I have until 5 p.m. today. Michael wrapped both hands around his mug. I know, you told me Wednesday. I've been drafting the acceptance 3 times and deleting it. I know that too. Daniel looked at him. How do you know that? Because you've had your laptop open in the kitchen until midnight every night this week, and every time I walk past the screen, it's a different version of the same email. Michael's voice was even not accusatory. You're not as subtle as you think you are. Daniel exhaled slowly. I thought I wanted that job more than anything I'd worked toward in 10 years. You did want it. I still want parts of it. The project is significant. The team is strong. The salary. He stopped. The salary is not the point. No, Michael agreed. It isn't. The point is, I don't know if I'm staying because I actually want to stay, or because I feel guilty about leaving. And those are not the same thing. One of them is a real-life decision. The other one is penance, and building a life out of penance is... He picked up his coffee. That doesn't work. I know that. Michael was quiet for a moment. He set down his mug with the careful deliberateness of a man who is choosing his words, the way he chose his movements with an injured shoulder, aware that the wrong motion costs more than the pause. When Karen died, he said, I had a conversation with myself about what I owed her. Whether I owed her grief of a certain duration. Whether I owed it to her memory to not be happy again for a specific period. Whether moving on meant betraying her. He paused. You know what I figured out? Daniel waited. That she didn't want my penance. She wanted my actual life. She wanted Noah to have a father who was present. She wanted me to eventually be okay. He looked at Daniel directly. What you owe Rachel is not a sacrifice. You don't owe her the Seattle job as punishment for Singapore. That's not a relationship, that's a transaction, and she's smart enough to know the difference. Daniel sat with that. He sat with it for a full minute without filling the silence. Michael. He said his brother's name quietly. I'm in love with her. Still. Again. I don't know which of those is more accurate, but it doesn't feel like guilt, and it doesn't feel like nostalgia. It feels like... He stopped. Like what? Like recognizing something I already knew but kept the lights off so I didn't have to look at it. Michael did not say anything for a moment. Then he nodded slowly in the way he nodded when something confirmed rather than surprised him. Does she know? He asked. No. Are you going to tell her? Not until I know what I'm actually offering her. I'm not going to walk up to Rachel Bennett and tell her I love her and then say, but I also might be leaving Friday. That's not honesty. That's just a different kind of carelessness. Michael picked up his coffee again. So figure out what you're offering her. You have until 5 p.m. I know. That's 9 hours and 45 minutes. I'm aware of the timeline, Michael. I'm just saying, you're an engineer. You work well under deadline. Daniel looked at his brother across the table. Michael's face held the specific combination of seriousness and dry humor that was the signature expression of a man who loved his family without sentiment and showed it in the most practical ways available. I need to call Seattle, Daniel said. Michael raised an eyebrow. Not to accept, Daniel said. To ask a question I should have asked a month ago. Hy made the call at 7:45 from the back porch, standing in the cold morning, with his coffee in one hand and his phone in the other, while the town of Cedar Falls woke up around him, in the particular unhurried way of small places on Friday mornings. The project director at the Seattle firm, a man named Warren, who had mentored Daniel for 4 years, and who had the genuine respect that comes from working beside someone through difficult projects, answered on the second ring. Daniel, I was expecting to hear from you today. Warren, I have a question before I give you my answer. A pause. All right. The Vancouver Bridge project. Is there any flexibility in the start date? Another pause. Longer this time. Define flexibility. 8 weeks, 10 at the outside. I have a community infrastructure project here that I started and have a professional obligation to see through to completion. I won't leave it in the middle. That's not negotiable for me. He heard Warren breathe out on the other end. Not frustration, something more considered. The regional director position can't wait 8 weeks, Daniel. The team needs leadership now. I understand. Then the regional director position isn't the right fit right now. He said it steadily, without bravado and without flinching. But I'm asking about the Vancouver project specifically. Is there any version of my joining the firm in a senior capacity that accommodates a delayed start? A longer silence. Daniel waited. He was good at waiting when he had already decided what he was willing to accept. Let me make a call, Warren said finally. Give me an hour. Daniel went back inside. Michael was making Noah's breakfast. Noah had appeared at the kitchen table in his pajamas with his hair in 6 directions, examining a library book about river systems with the focused morning energy of a child who woke up immediately and fully without transition. Uncle Dan, Noah said without looking up from the book. Did you know that rivers can change direction over time? I did know that. It takes a really long time, like thousands of years, but they do it. He turned a page. The book says they remember where they came from even when they go somewhere different. Daniel looked at the top of his nephew's head. He looked at Michael, who had his back to him at the stove. He looked at the kitchen that had become over 7 weeks less like his brother's house and more like a place where he actually lived. Yeah, he said. That sounds right. I was at the school site by 8:30. He had not told anyone about the Seattle call. He had not told Rachel anything yet because he had nothing to tell her yet that was complete. He worked through the morning with the crew, and the work was good, and he let it be good without thinking past it. At 9:50, Bill Hargrove found him at the eastern end of the drainage channel. You hear about the garden donation? Hargrove asked. Daniel looked up. No. 3 families went in together, donated enough for a proper composting setup and 2 raised beds. They want to name one after the project. Hargrove paused with the particular difficulty of a man who is not comfortable with sentiment but is experiencing some. My son's the one who suggested it. He said the garden should have a name so it knows it's permanent. Daniel set down his level. That's a good reason for a name. He's 8, Hargrove said, as if this explained and excused the wisdom simultaneously. Daniel nodded. 8-year-olds tend to understand permanent better than we give them credit for. Hargrove looked at him sidelong. You plan on being around to see it finished? It was the same question he had been asking himself in different forms for 9 hours. He gave Hargrove the only honest answer available. Working on it, he said. His phone buzzed at 10:43. Warren. He stepped away from the channel and answered. I talked to the project board, Warren said. The Vancouver start is more flexible than I initially indicated. They can absorb a 6-week delay if the lead engineer is confirmed and documentation is in order before then. Daniel's chest did something involuntary. 6 weeks. 6 weeks. You'd need to be in Vancouver by mid-December. The regional director position would need to be filled separately. I want to be honest with you about that. That structure doesn't work with a delayed start. But the Vancouver project alone is significant, Daniel. Senior project engineer, your own team full design authority. It's not the same title, it is the same quality of work. Daniel looked across the schoolyard. At the drainage channel that was 60% complete. At the volunteers who had shown up in the rain at midnight to hold something together. At the school where Rachel had spent 11 years building something that actually mattered to the people inside it. I need until 3 o'clock, he said. Daniel. Warren. 3 o'clock. Then I'll have an answer for you, and it will be honest, and it will be final. A pause. 3 o'clock, Warren said. Daniel put his phone in his pocket. He stood very still for a moment. Then he went and found Rachel. She was in her office, which was on the first floor near the main entrance, a small room that somehow managed to contain a counselor's desk, 2 chairs sized for children, a shelf of books with bent spines from actual use, and approximately 40 children's drawings pinned to every available surface. He knocked on the open door. She looked up from her desk. She had reading glasses on that he had not seen before, simple wire frames that she pulled off immediately in the unconscious way of someone who hasn't yet made peace with needing them. Daniel, is something wrong with the site? No, the site's fine. He came in and stood, rather than sitting, because sitting felt like it implied a longer conversation, and he needed to say the first thing first. I need to talk to you about something, not the project. She looked at him steadily. She set down her pen. Warren called, he said. My firm in Seattle. There's a version of the position that has a 6-week delayed start. I would finish here, complete the drainage project, and then go to Vancouver for a bridge project in December. Rachel did not react visibly. She had always been able to receive information without performing her reaction to it, which was both something he deeply respected and something that made it very difficult to know what she was actually feeling. Okay, she said. I'm not telling you that as a decision. I'm telling you because I told myself I was done making decisions without including the people they affect. And you are someone this affects, so I'm telling you. Something shifted slightly in her expression. Not much. Enough. Vancouver, she said. Yes. Not Seattle. Not the regional director position. A different role. Same quality of work, honestly. Better project. She looked at her desk for a moment, then back at him. And what are you asking me, Daniel? This was the moment. He had known it was coming since 7:15 in Michael's kitchen, and he had not found a way to make it less exposed than it was. I'm not asking you for anything, he said. I'm telling you where I am. I want to finish what I started here. That's real, and it has nothing to do with you, it's just true. And separately also true is that the last 7 weeks have made it impossible for me to pretend that I don't know what I walked away from 11 years ago. He stopped. I'm not asking you to respond to that right now. I'm not asking you to do anything. You deserve to know before I made the call. Rachel sat very still. Outside the office, the school hallway produced its ordinary sounds, distant voices, a door, someone's sneakers on the linoleum. Normal life, continuing normally around the entirely non-normal thing happening in this small room. The last 7 weeks, she said carefully. You have fixed my porch, organized a community project, defended it in front of the school board, and dug drainage channels in the rain at midnight. She paused. And you think I don't know what that means? He waited. I've been watching you, she said. The whole time. I've been watching you because I needed to know whether the man I was watching was real, or whether it was someone performing enough decency to feel better about 11 years ago. Her voice was even, but not detached. It carried something that cost her something to say. I think he's real. I think you're real. And that frightens me more than the other option. Why? Because the other option, the man who was just performing, would leave, and it would hurt, and then it would confirm what I already believed, that you were who I remembered. She looked at him with the clear, unguarded honesty that was the most recognizable thing about her. The real version of you leaving is a different kind of loss. He crossed the room in 2 steps. Not dramatically, not in the movies way. He just reduced the distance because the distance was wrong. Rachel. He said her name the way she had said his in the parking lot 7 weeks ago, like it contained more than the syllables. I spent 11 years being very strategic about my life. I optimized for the right things, and I called the results success, and I was alone in a very comfortable apartment in Seattle, and I had not been honestly happy in longer than I could accurately measure. She looked up at him. I don't know what Cedar Falls is yet, he said. I don't know what we are. I know the project needs 6 more weeks. I know Noah needs someone at school pickups until Michael's shoulder heals. I know Lily's concert is in 3 weeks, and I told her I would be there. He paused. I know that I have never once in my adult life stayed somewhere when it was inconvenient to stay. And I think it's genuinely possible that staying is the thing I've been most afraid of, not the other way around. Rachel was quiet. Her hands were flat on the desk in front of her, which was something she did when she was thinking carefully and did not want her hands to give away what she was thinking. The Vancouver project, she said. December. Yes. And from now until December. Here, if that's something you want. She looked at him for a long, searching moment. I need you to understand something, she said. I am not the same person I was at 29. I do not need rescuing. I do not need someone to fix my porch and my school drainage and tell me they love me, and then leave me to manage what that means alone. I have Lily. She has already lost the daily presence of one man she loved. I will not. Her voice caught just slightly, and she steadied it. I will not let her love you if you are going to leave in a way that damages her. I know. Do you? Yes, Rachel, yes, I know. He said it with a quietness that had nothing to perform in it. I am not asking you to trust me. Trust is something that gets built with actions over time, and I have 7 weeks of actions and 11 years of the opposite, and those don't cancel each other out. I know that. I'm asking for the chance to keep building. Another long silence. The school hallway outside. The ordinary world continuing. Then Rachel said, Lily's concert is November 8th. He waited. If you're there, she said. He said in the 3rd row where we always sit with Noah on November 8th, that's something. She paused. It's not everything, but it's something real. I'll be there, he said. And Vancouver. When December comes. We'll figure it out honestly, together, or separately if that's what's right, but honestly. She nodded. She picked up her pen. She looked back at her desk in a way that meant the conversation had reached its boundary for now, and he respected that boundary completely because it was hers to set. He turned to leave. He was at the door when she said his name. Daniel. He turned back. The unsent invitations, she said. I threw them away, last week. She held his gaze. Not because it didn't happen, because I stopped needing to hold on to proof that it did. He stood in the doorway and felt the specific, irreversible quality of a sentence that changes the shape of something. That's the bravest thing I've heard in 7 weeks, he said quietly. She almost smiled. Not quite. Close enough. He walked back to the site. He picked up his phone and called Warren at 2:58 p.m. 6 weeks, he said. I'll be in Vancouver by December 15th. Send me the project documentation now so I can review while I'm finishing up here. Done, Warren said. And then, with the directness of a man who had known Daniel Mercer long enough to read him, you sound different. Different how? Settled. A pause. It suits you. Daniel put his phone away and went back to the drainage channel. Bill Hargrove was directing 2 volunteers on the western end, with the authority of a man who had found his purpose in the specific task of making sure other people did the job right. The crew worked with the efficiency of people who had been doing this long enough to trust each other. At the eastern end, the channel was taking shape in the clean, functional way that well-designed things take shape, not beautiful exactly, but right. The kind of right that holds. Daniel picked up his shovel and got back in the trench. At 3:45, his phone buzzed with a text from Noah. Dad says his shoulder cleared for light driving today. He drove to the grocery store himself. I watched. He did good. Daniel read the message twice. He felt something expand in his chest, relief. Yes, but also something that had been underneath the relief this whole time. Unexamined, the fear that Michael's recovery was the thing tethering him to Cedar Falls, in a way that was convenient for everyone to believe and easy to hide behind. Michael was getting better. That was unambiguously good. That was the whole reason Daniel had come, and the reason he was staying had shifted gradually and honestly into something else entirely. He texted back, "That's great news, bud. Real great." Noah's reply, "Does this mean you're leaving soon?" He stared at the message for a long moment. The 8-year-old directness of it. The way children ask the question that adults spend hours arranging around. He typed, "Not yet," and then deleted it. He typed, "I'll be at your dinner table tonight and we can talk about it then." Then he sent it. Noah sent back a thumbs-up emoji, which was the 8-year-old version of a complete sentence. The crew finished at 5:30. They had made significant progress. The channel was 70% complete, which meant they were tracking ahead of Daniel's revised schedule, which meant the project would be done before he got on a plane. He had known that mathematically for 2 days. Knowing it emotionally was different. Knowing it with his boots on, and his hands dirty, and Bill Hargrove slapping him once on the shoulder with the gruff brevity of a man who considered that a complete expression of appreciation, that was the version that landed. How was loading tools into his truck when Rachel appeared at the edge of the site. She was in her work coat, which meant she had come straight from the school building. She was holding 2 paper cups of coffee from the vending machine in the teacher's lounge, which was terrible coffee, and which she had always claimed she only drank in genuine emergencies. She held one out to him. He took it. "This is the emergency coffee." It's been an emergency kind of day. They stood beside the truck in the cold, late afternoon air. The crew had mostly dispersed. The channel held its new shape in the ground, clean lines in the earth exactly where the water was supposed to go. "Did you call Seattle?" she asked. "Vancouver, 6 weeks, December 15th start." She nodded. She looked at the channel. "The garden goes in over that section," she said. "After the channel's covered. Lily already knows what she wants to plant." "What does she want?" "Tomatoes. Because Bill Hargrove's son told her about his." A pause. "And sunflowers. Because she says they look like something that decided to stay." He looked at the side of Rachel's face. She was looking at the garden plot, not at him. "Rachel." "I heard you," she said quietly. "This afternoon. I heard everything you said." "I know. I'm not ready to say it back yet." She turned and looked at him with the clearest eyes he had ever seen on another person. "But I want you to know that I'm not afraid of you anymore. I spent 11 years being afraid of what it meant that I had loved you and you had left. And I'm done being afraid of that." She paused. "Whatever this becomes, whatever it is, I'm not afraid." I held the terrible vending machine coffee and looked at the woman who had been the truest thing he had ever walked away from, standing in the cold with muddy boots and clear eyes, and he thought, this is what it feels like when you actually stay. Not the absence of difficulty, not the absence of complication or distance, or the very real December flight to Vancouver that was coming regardless. Just the presence of something honest. The presence of someone who was not performing their courage and not asking him to perform his. "November 8th, he said. "3rd row, she said. They drank the terrible coffee standing beside his truck in the cold, and neither of them said anything else, and it was the most complete silence he had experienced in 11 years. Behind them in the turned earth of the schoolyard, the garden waited. The week after the board meeting moved fast. Not in the frantic way of crisis, but in the purposeful way of people who have stopped debating and started doing. Daniel was at the site every morning by 7:30. The crew had settled into a rhythm that required less direction from him now, and more presence, which was different and better. He walked the channel, checked measurements, answered questions, made adjustments. He ate lunch in the schoolyard with whoever was working that day. How was becoming, without quite deciding, to a familiar part of Cedar Falls. in the way that people become familiar when they stop treating a place as temporary. Noah noticed first. Children always do. "You're not checking your Seattle emails anymore," Noah said on Wednesday morning over cereal, with the casual certainty of a child who has been observing something for days and has only now decided to report his findings. Daniel looked up. "What makes you say that? Before you always had your phone face down at breakfast. Now you leave it on the table face up." Noah ate another spoonful. "Face down means you're waiting for something. Face up means you're not." Daniel stared at his nephew for a moment. "That's very perceptive." "Ms. Bennett taught us about body language and social-emotional learning," Noah said matter-of-factly. "She says people communicate more with what they do than what they say." Daniel looked at his phone face up on the table. "She's right about that." "Are you staying?" Noah asked. Direct, no runway, 8 years old and already done with the long approach. Daniel set down his spoon. "I'm here through December. After that I have a job in Vancouver that I committed to." He paused. "But I'm not going back to Seattle, not permanently. That's done." Noah processed this with the methodical quiet of a child running calculations. "Vancouver is closer than Seattle," he said finally. 3 hours by plane, 1 by a faster route when the bridge I'm building gets finished." Noah looked at him sharply. "What bridge?" "The one I'm building, between Vancouver and the mainland. It'll cut the travel time significantly." Noah pointed at him with his spoon. "You're building a bridge to make it easier to come back." Daniel had not framed it that way to himself, but sitting at Michael's kitchen table at 7:40 on a Wednesday morning, he understood that his 8-year-old nephew had just said the truest thing that had been said in this kitchen in 7 weeks. "Yeah," he said. "I guess I am." Noah nodded as if this confirmed a hypothesis. He finished his cereal. He picked up his backpack. At the door he turned back. "Uncle Dan, Lily told me her mom has been humming in the mornings." He said this with the gravely significant tone of someone delivering important intelligence. "She doesn't usually do that." Then he was out the door. Daniel sat alone in the kitchen for 60 seconds. Then he picked up his coffee face up on the table and got on with the day. Michael's shoulder had recovered enough by the second week of November that he was cleared for light duty at the paramedic station desk work dispatch, support the administrative side of emergency services that he hated, but that got him back into the building and the rhythm of his actual life. He drove himself on the first day and came home quieter than usual. Not sad quiet, but full quiet, the way people are after something they've been missing for a long time gives itself back. At dinner, he looked across the table at Daniel and said, "You know you don't have to stay because of me anymore." "I know," Daniel said. "You're staying for other reasons." "Yeah." Michael nodded once. He passed the bread. "Good," he said. That was it. One word carrying everything that needed to be carried. Noah looked between them. Is this one of those adult conversations that has a lot of words hidden inside the short words? Yes, both brothers said simultaneously. Noah accepted this and returned to his dinner. The project completion happened on a Saturday 12 days before Lily's concert. The last section of the drainage channel was finished at 2:17 in the afternoon. Daniel knew the exact time because he had been watching the clock without meaning to the way you watch a clock when you understand that a specific moment is going to matter. Bill Hargrove tamped down the final section of gravel with the focused care of a man doing something for the last time in the best possible way. When he straightened up, he looked at Daniel and gave him the same single shoulder tap he'd given him 3 weeks earlier. This time he added words. "Clean work," he said. Coming from Bill Hargrove, those 2 words were the engineering equivalent of a standing ovation. The crew stood around the finished channel for a moment, the particular silence of people who have just completed something real. Someone had brought coffee in a big thermos. Someone else had produced a bag of donuts that were already half gone. Parents and volunteers who had given 12, 15, 20 Saturdays to this project stood in a loose circle with muddy boots and paper cups and the expression of people who are not quite ready to stop being this version of themselves. Rachel was there. She had been there since 8 in the morning, moving between the site and the school building, managing the dozen small logistical things that needed managing. She stood at the edge of the circle now with a coffee cup in both hands, watching the finished drainage channel with an expression that Daniel recognized after 7 weeks of learning to read her again. It was the expression she had when something she had worked toward for a long time had actually arrived, and she was making sure to actually feel it, rather than immediately move to the next thing. He crossed to her. She looked up when she heard him coming. She looked at him the way she had been looking at him since the afternoon in her office, openly, without the protective distance she'd maintained through the first weeks. It was a subtle difference. Enormous. "It's done," he said. "It's done," she agreed. Then quietly, "You said you would." He heard everything in that. The way she said it, not surprised, not relieved exactly. More like someone who has updated a long-held understanding of a person and is still getting used to what the update means. "I said I would," he confirmed. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she turned to the crew. "I want to say something," she said clearly enough for the group to hear. The conversations quieted. "I've worked at this school for 9 years. I have seen this community show up for each other in a lot of different ways. This is one of the best." She paused. "Not because of the channel, because of what it took to build it. Every Saturday, every rainy Thursday night, every board meeting where someone who didn't have to show up showed up anyway." She looked around the circle. "My daughter is going to plant tomatoes over that ground in the spring. She already knows exactly where. And when she's doing that, I want her to know the names of the people who made it possible." She raised her cup. "Thank you, all of you." Bill Hargrove, who Daniel had come to understand, was not a man who accepted sentiment easily, looked at the middle distance for a moment with his jaw set. Then he raised his cup without a word. The circle raised theirs. After, when people had begun drifting toward their cars, Rachel found Daniel loading the last of the equipment into his truck. She came alongside him and helped lift a board without being asked. "Lily's been practicing her piece every night," she said. "Noah told me. He also told me she made him listen to it 4 times on Tuesday." Rachel smiled. Actually smiled the full version, not the careful partial version she'd deployed through most of October. "She's nervous." "She shouldn't be. She's been preparing." Nervous and prepared aren't mutually exclusive. She handed him the board. Their hands overlapped briefly on the wood. Neither of them moved immediately. "She asked me this morning if you were going to bring flowers." He looked at her. "What did you say?" "I said I didn't know." "What did she say?" "She said, and I'm quoting directly, 'Tell him yellow ones, because those are the ones that look like they mean it.'" He stood with that for a moment. An 8-year-old girl who had watched one important man leave her daily life and was now carefully and in her own way testing whether this one was different. She was testing it with the specific measurement of yellow flowers, which was exactly the right measurement because it required nothing dramatic, only attention. Only the willingness to listen to a small thing and respond. "I'll get yellow ones," he said. Rachel nodded. She let go of the board. November 8th was a Tuesday. How was it the florist when it opened at 8? He bought yellow sunflowers, a full bunch, the kind that looked as Lily had correctly identified, like they meant it. He drove to Michael's house, put them in a water glass in the refrigerator, drove Noah to school, went to the site for a final walkthrough of the completed drainage system, wrote the last of his documentation, emailed the full project file to the district's maintenance department with a cover letter that explained every decision and its engineering rationale in enough detail that anyone competent could maintain it indefinitely. He closed his laptop at 4 p.m. He sat in the school parking lot in Michael's truck for 10 minutes doing nothing except existing in the particular stillness that comes after a long, sustained effort reaches its end. The project was complete. His documentation was done. His commitment to Cedar Falls Elementary School drainage system was fulfilled in every technical and human sense of the word. He felt the absence of the task. The way you feel the silence after a sound you've been living with for months suddenly stops. He also felt rising steadily into that silence, something that did not feel like ending. He picked up Noah at 3:15. Noah was bouncing on the balls of his feet at pickup, which was his physical expression of maximum excitement in a body that did not know any other gear. Lily ran through the piece twice at lunch. Noah reported climbing into the truck. once with eyes open and once with eyes closed. She said the eyes closed version was better because she couldn't see people's faces judging her. Smart approach. I told her the audience wants her to do well. She said that's nice, but she'd still rather not look at them. Reasonable. Are you nervous? Noah asked. Daniel pulled out of the pickup line. About what? About seeing Ms. Bennett. Like seeing her at the concert. In a different way than school. He glanced at his nephew. Did someone put you up to asking that? No, Noah said, with the specific indignation of someone who has been caught but intends to deny it. I'm just asking. Because you do the still face. The still face. The one you do when you're feeling something you haven't sorted out yet. He drove for a moment without answering. A little nervous, he admitted. Noah nodded sagely. She's nervous too, he said. Lily says Ms. Bennett changed her earrings 3 times this morning. Daniel kept his eyes on the road and did not say anything because there was nothing to say that would improve on that information. The concert was at 7. The multi-purpose room had been arranged with rows of chairs and a small performance area at the front. Parents filled in gradually from 6:45, moving with the organized chaos of adults who have done this before, but always slightly underestimate how many people will come and how many of them will want the same 3 rows. Daniel got there at 6:50 with Noah and the sunflowers wrapped in paper and found seats in the 3rd row on the aisle without being directed. 3rd row, where Rachel always sat. Rachel and Lily arrived at 6:55. Lily was in a blue dress that she was wearing with the solemn ceremony of someone for whom the dress was armor. She had her music folder tucked under one arm and her chin up in the way of children who are terrified and have decided the correct response to terror is to look taller. She saw Daniel first. She saw the sunflowers second. Something in her face shifted. The armor cracked just slightly in the best possible way. She crossed the distance between them with 3 quick steps and stopped in front of him. You got yellow, she said. You specified yellow. I didn't know if you'd remember. He crouched to her level and held out the sunflowers. I remembered, he said simply. She took them with both hands and held them against her chest like something she intended to protect. Then she looked at him with Rachel's eyes in her smaller face and said very quietly, Are you going to keep coming to things? The room was full of noise around them. Parents, children, the particular acoustic chaos of a school event organizing itself. He was aware of all of it and aware of none of it. Yes, he said, I'm going to keep coming to things. She studied him for another moment. Then she nodded once with the decisive finality of an 8-year-old who has made a judgment call and is satisfied with the evidence. Okay, she said. She straightened up and walked to the back with the other performer's sunflowers still against her chest. He stood and turned, and Rachel was right there. She had seen all of it. He could tell from her face, not the careful face, not the managed face, the actual one. Her eyes were bright in a way that she was very clearly not going to acknowledge in a school multi-purpose room at a children's concert, and he respected that completely. 3rd row, she said. 3rd row, he confirmed. They sat down. Noah settled in on Daniel's left. Rachel sat on his right close enough that their arms nearly touched along the shared armrest, and neither of them moved away. The concert began. Lily performed 4th. She walked to the front with her folder and her chin up, and she did not look at the audience for the first 16 bars, which Daniel understood was the strategy. Then at a moment that must have felt right to her internally, she looked up. She found her mother first. Then she found Daniel. She did not smile. She was too concentrated for smiling. But something in her shoulders released by exactly 1 degree, and she played the rest of the piece with a steadiness that had not been there in the first 16 bars. When she finished, the applause from the 3rd row was somewhat disproportionate to what the rest of the room was providing. Noah was the primary contributor. Daniel was not far behind. Rachel clapped with the restrained intensity of a mother who is trying very hard not to cry in public and is mostly succeeding. Afterward in the parking lot, while Noah and Lily ran ahead to look at something that had captured their collective 8-year-old attention. Daniel and Rachel walked side by side in the way they had been walking side by side for 3 weeks, close, unhurried, without making it a thing. She played beautifully, he said. She did. Rachel paused. She's been different this week. Lighter. I didn't want to read into it. But I think she decided something. About you. About whether you were worth attaching to. He was quiet for a moment. What do you think she decided? I think you handed her yellow sunflowers and told her you remembered, and I think that was the entire decision right there. She glanced at him sideways. She's her mother's daughter. We do not require grand gestures. We require people to listen to the small things and then actually do them. He stopped walking. She stopped too. I listened to the small things, he said. I know. For 7 weeks I listened. I know Daniel, and I'm going to keep listening, from here until December, and then from Vancouver, and every time I come back, which is going to be more often than you probably expect. He said it plainly, without performance, the way he had finally learned to say the true things after a lifetime of packaging them. I know I don't have the right to ask you for anything yet. I know I have 11 years of the opposite on my record, and 7 weeks of something better, and those don't balance. I'm not asking them to balance. I'm asking for the chance to keep adding to the 7 weeks until it means something. Rachel looked at him. The parking lot, the other families streaming past the 2 children somewhere ahead in the dark. All of it continued around them without interrupting the specific gravity of this moment. You fixed my porch, she said. Yeah. You fixed the school drainage. You showed up at midnight in the rain. You sat in the 3rd row. She paused. You bought yellow sunflowers because an 8-year-old told you those were the ones that look like they mean it. Yeah. That's not 11 years of opposite, she said quietly. That's a man who finally figured out what he's actually made of. She looked at him with the clear, unguarded honesty that was the most Rachel thing about her. I'm not forgiving 11 years tonight. That's a longer conversation. But tonight I'm not afraid of it, and I'm not running from it. He reached over and took her hand. Not a dramatic gesture, just a hand. She looked down at it for the moment, then back at him, and she did not pull away. November 9th, she said. You come for dinner. Not a project meeting, not a school thing. Dinner, with me and Lily. I'll be there, he said. I know, she said. And the way she said it was different from every other time she had said those 2 words over the past 7 weeks. It wasn't resignation. It wasn't careful. It was the sound of a woman who had updated her understanding of a person and had decided the update was worth trusting. Lily came running back from wherever she and Noah had gone, sunflowers still in her arms. She looked at their joined hands with the instantaneous perception of a child who has been quietly monitoring a situation for weeks. She said nothing. She looked at Daniel. Are you coming to the Harvest Festival? She asked. When is it? 3 weeks. I'll be there, he said. She accepted this with a nod. She tugged her mother's free hand, and they walked toward the car, all 4 of them, in the particular unplanned formation of people who have stopped calculating their distances from each other. The Harvest Festival came. He was there. November became December, and the drainage project garden received its first raised bed frame, built on a Saturday, by 12 volunteers who had not been asked but had simply shown up. Lily knew where her tomatoes were going. Hargrove's son knew where his were going. They debated the spacing with the seriousness of horticulturalists. December 15th approached, the night before his flight to Vancouver. Daniel sat at Michael's kitchen table for the last time with a cup of coffee and the quiet of a house where 2 people he loved were asleep down the hall. He looked at the table where he had drafted the drainage plans, opened and closed the Seattle email 17 times, and eaten 412 breakfasts with a boy who had taught him without trying to what it looked like to stay present inside grief instead of optimizing your way around it. He looked at his phone. Rachel had texted at 9:15, safe flight tomorrow. Lily says to tell you she's starting the tomato seeds indoors in February. She expects you to be there when they go in the ground in May. He read that twice. May. 5 months from now. An 8-year-old planting seeds in February as a claim on a future she had decided to believe in. He typed back, "Tell her I'll be there for the planting. And tell her to pick a spot with good drainage. I know someone who checked." 3 dots appeared. Then Rachel's reply. She laughed. She says she knows you'll come because you're the kind of person who finishes what he starts. I told her that's new information. She said, no, Mom. It was always in there. He just needed the right thing to finish. He set down his phone. He sat in the kitchen that had been his for 8 weeks and looked at the coffee going cool in front of him, and he understood with the complete bone-deep certainty of a man who has finally stopped running that an 8-year-old girl who planned to plant tomatoes in May was the most accurate structural assessment of who he was that had ever been made. He was the kind of person who finished what he started. He had just needed to choose the right things to start. He boarded the plane to Vancouver the next morning with the project documentation in his bag, a return ticket in 3 weeks, and the understanding that the distance between Cedar Falls and Vancouver was not the kind of distance that mattered anymore. Not for a man who had finally learned that staying was not a place you arrived at. It was a decision you made again and again every ordinary morning for every person worth coming home to.